Hey guys! Today we have Paul Forrest with us, who is a senior technical artist at Amazon Games. In the past, he's also worked at Blizzard and Sega and a whole bunch of other AAA companies. His experience goes way, way back, and he is going to be shedding a little bit of light on what it is that technical artists actually do. Because even among game designers, that's something that's not always super well understood. If you have any questions for Paul or for me or Alex, leave them in the comments down below. And if you like this kind of content, please like and subscribe to see more. I hope you enjoy the episode. Hello, everybody. How are you doing today?
Hey, good to see you, Ari. Doing well.
Good to see you, Alex.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, Paul. So nice to have you with us today.
It's great to be here. Thanks.
It looks like you're somewhere really beautiful. What is your background?
That is the back patio here in Lake Forest. So this is just outside my office, my home office.
Wow, that's lovely. I wish I had such a good home office.
Well, a couple plants will do wonders.
Yeah, I could stand to have a few plants, but I'm not good at taking care of them.
I've got just this one sitting right back here for my friend Laura,
Nice.
and that's my whole plant. That's all the plant commitment I can make right now. Oh man.
Well, I get odd creatures. I get praying mantises and squirrels and ravens and all kinds of things out here. So I make plant maintenance it's part of my shtick.
That sounds cool.
It kind of goes with the name Paul Forrest, right? Couldn't
Right,
be too far
right.
from
There
it.
you go.
It does.
All right. Well, let me give a little context. So Paul and I worked together for years, right? I believe it was
Yeah.
from Wrath of the Lich King until Mists of Pandaria, right?
Correct.
And that's World of Warcraft, right?
On World of Warcraft.
Yep.
That's right. And for context, Paul, you are a technical artist and have worked on not just World of Warcraft, but everything from NHL games to what was it, Golden Axe to Iron Man to a whole bunch of other stuff. So the reason I wanted to bring you on the show was because as a technical artist, you and designers had to work together pretty frequently, right? This is a podcast to help game designers understand more about the industry and how it works. And so would you mind just kind of going into a little bit of like what it is that you did and how you'd interact with designers, and then we'll just kind of roll from there.
Okay, sure. I'm going to start out with saying that technical art is probably one of the most vague job descriptions in the industry. A lot of people think that we just make puppets for animators, and for a certain percentage of us, that's true. That's generally the door in, as it were. Lots of frustrated animators in tech art land, wanting better rigs and better this and better that, and so they start doing it themselves. And next thing they know, they find themselves in tech art land.
Yeah.
But as far as interaction with design goes, that's actually a very excellent place to start, because really it's all about the game, right? Like, it's not just about making things look good or making it very easy to make content for the game, which are often like the justifications for tech art to exist. But it's about shipping the game and shipping it at the highest possible quality bar. And so one of the big missions, kind of universal to all tech artists, is getting that iteration time down so that you can actually try out your ideas as quickly as possible.
Can you explain for the audience that might not know what the term iteration time, what that is?
So, every time you get to test something, every time you get to try out your idea, like, and then, so the time involved in trying out your idea from, I think I should, to playing it in your prototype, that's the thing we want to get to be as short as possible, because the more iterations, the more turns of the crank, as it were, the higher quality you're going to get, because if you had more time to explore the idea very thoroughly. And with tech art and design, a lot of the time it's trying to figure out how the heck we're going to do it in the first place. Like I recall, Alex, there was a set of horns we wanted to grow out of warlock
Yes.
foreheads, and
And the
that was
wings.
yeah, it was just
Remember
kind
the
of like,
wings?
can we even do this? And we
Yeah.
figured a way out, and then there were some gotchas,
Oh my goodness, I remember that. It was when the first time we worked together on a project like that was getting the animated wings to pop out of one of the set bonuses, right? So as you're wearing the
right.
helmet, you'd apparently see these little wings. Then I remember years later when I was working on the Warlock rework, we wanted to make an actual pair of wings sprout out of the back of the Warlock as you were running and have it animate as you jumped, which was something that had never been done before. We'd never done synced models at the
Right.
same time. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the solution we came up with was we took Illidan, we cut off his whole body, like just left his wings, and said, well, this character is built off a night elf, so it has all the player animations, and we just synchronized the player animations, no matter what race you were, with the night elf animations.
That's correct. And we also then extended that out to weapons so that we could have synchronized weapon animations, which was a pretty big deal at the time. Like we'd
Yeah.
never done it before.
Modern
But yeah, stuff
problems
like
require
that.
modern solutions.
Exactly. Or sometimes just throwing things at the wall and seeing what sticks, honestly. I mean, it's
Yeah, and a lot of people often tend to think tech art, oh, that's lots of programming or it's very rigid, right? But if anything, it's one of the more creative forms of art because you have to explore the unknown, right? And be comfortable doing that.
absolutely. And you also get kind of a very high level view of the project. Like, as a modeler or character animator, you get very deeply involved in those specific areas, and because there's so many of these items in the game, you don't really get to see much else until you're actually playing. But from a tech art perspective, you kind of see the whole shooting match. It's you,
Hmm.
you get to fiddle with everything from animation to texturing and shading to audio. It's it's a very it's not a boring line of work, to say the least.
So,
Well,
do you often get to concept your own designs that you were working on, or do you usually receive concepts from somebody else and then bring them to life with modeling and rigging and all of that?
Well, so by the time it gets to us, usually all the concept stuff has been done. There are extraordinarily rare occasions where we'll be guiding look development. Examples that come to mind include the map system.
yeah.
Again on WoW, the map system was handled by the most excellent Trevor Rothman, and he we're trying to come up with POV icons, right? Like the icon you see when you come up on a dungeon entrance or whatever else. Like, it should be special, it should look cool, but it also can't take like a ton of Illustrator time or anything like that. So in that particular case, Trevor led on look development, and we generated kind of a toon shading method that could then be composited into the existing map infrastructure. So in rare occasions, yes, we do, but a lot of the time it's like, oh, here's a fully finished model, we need a rig. On the WoW team in particular, we would frequently reuse the base skeleton. Like Alex mentioned, the wings and having the night elf animations. That's a pretty standard production technique, actually, is to just reuse, reuse, reuse.
Yeah. Context for people who don't know what we mean by reusing a base skeleton. Imagine that you have a character that are very similar in size and weight, but maybe they just move a little bit differently, right? If you went through and made a whole new human skeleton, right, that might take a week on its own just to get started, and then you'll spend a day on every animation. In a complex game like WoW, you might have 100 animations on a character. So if you make a brand new character and a brand new skeleton and redo everything, you're redoing 100 days of work for the one new character. But if you take the same skeleton, you can add all these extra details, different armor sets, different textures, etc., and reuse the animation on those characters, and then just tweak them a little bit afterwards to add some flavor or personality to it. And by doing this, you can dramatically save and improve the amount of content in your game and the variety of characters.
Absolutely correct. In fact, this is why it takes so long to add a new player race
Yeah.
to the game, because it's such a deep system. There's so many weapons and so many specific weapon animations,
Hmm.
and it all has to sync together. There can't be any gaps. Players complain when they can't do something on a new player race that they could do on another, and
Yeah.
they're nothing if not vocal.
Yeah. Now, Paul, maybe for those. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Ari. Go ahead.
I was just going to ask if you worked on the Blood Elves when the Blood Elves came out.
So my involvement with Blood Elves, I got there like just after Lich King shipped. Well, actually, yeah, it was just after Lich King shipped, and one of the reasons I was brought on was um, to help get us to a point where we could sim ship in China.
Mm-hmm.
This doesn't sound like a big deal, but Chinese government regulations, especially now, good heavens, I can't even imagine what it's like now with their new rules.
Yeah.
But back then, we had to scrub all the content and make sure we didn't include any representations of dead body.
Let's just, because we do have a multi national audience here. Let's give a little bit of context. So when you release in different regions have different laws about the kind of content you release based on who you are. If you are a native Chinese developer, you can have representations of skeletons and so on with the permission of the government. If you are a Western nation, the United States, Canada, Mexico, etc., then you are not allowed to represent bones by default because it might be done in a way that is insulting to the culture of China and Chinese traditionalism.
Correct.
So in order to do that, we had to do a whole bunch of changes. And this was for Wrath of the Lich King, which was an entire expansion about
skulls
and the undead. So a good portion of Paul's life was going through and replacing little skeletons that were just there decoratively with sacks of grain or with ghouls. I remember we could have skinned creatures, but not skeletal creatures. So you went through and replaced the undead with vampires, correct?
Yep. And we even had to close up any exposed bones on the undead player races, so they became much smoother. It was all kinds of wacky stuff.
Yep.
But getting back to your question about Blood Elves, I didn't actually become directly involved with the Blood Elves until we redid all the characters. I think for so Pandera got us the Pandarans, and I think maybe the first set of redos, but we didn't get them all in at the same time. We kind of patched them in over time because it was just so much work to upres the characters. And by upres, I mean we remodeled everything to be more modern feeling, to give them more articulation in their faces, to do all these things, increase the resolution of the texture maps. And that was a tremendous undertaking by the whole team.
So the goal at that time, right, and as a designer, a lot of what you're doing is setting context and goals for the execution, right? The context for this was they wanted to increase not only the presentation quality and visuals of the experience themselves, but they also wanted to be able to do more expressive faces, be able to do greater emotional range, right, and really represent that. Now, when you came to those human skeletons, before you guys did any of the redos on that, what was there before and what was there after, and what did the work you do enable? So
previously, how many player races did we have back then? We just gotten the Pandarans.
It's 11.
And they were at a massively higher visual fidelity than anything else we had.
Yep.
They had fully articulated faces and jaws. They had some secondary animation because they had big bellies and things. And nothing else in the game had anything like that. So in a lot of ways, the Pandarans were our prototype in terms of what could we get away with, how many what we call joints, part of the skeleton, how many of those we could include, because for every joint, of course, you're taking a computational hit, and in an MMO context, because you don't have control over how many people are going to be on screen at once, you have to be incredibly careful about budgeting those joints. So we got the Pandarans to a good place, and we had a whole zone full of them, so we could do some testing there, and from that guided our specification for the humans and the gnomes and everybody else in between. The human skeleton had like a jawbone. We call it flappy jaw.
Yeah.
It's kind of like it's like Kermit the Frog, right? Everything is
Mm-hmm.
and that was the extent of facial articulation. I think maybe they had an angry eyes alternate state. that was the whole of it. Hands. I don't even think we fully modeled hands. There was
it was like a glove, really. It was like a glove that closed.
Yeah. In the old days of PlayStation, that's the first PlayStation, not even PlayStation 2. We called it a trigger mitten. You'd have like, this is your hand, and there's no articulation. There it is. no articulation at all. But now, like with this new higher bone count and all the rest of it, we were able to create articulation on the fingers, create eyelids, and I think there was even an attempt to include a geometric highlight in the eyes, but
wow,
that one was very hard to see.
Yeah, they're pretty far away from the faces, except for in cutscenes, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So,
and the pipeline for cutscenes is entirely different, even though it uses the same in-game assets.
Can you describe what a pipeline is, right? Because at people who are making assets in Unity or whatever, they just throw something in, or they bet them up the asset store and they use it. Now, you and I understand have what we call a pipeline to get the stuff we want. So explain what that is and how you interplay with that pipeline.
Sure thing. So pipelines are really methods of working to achieve that quick iteration time, right? So in the case of characters, I should back up actually. There's a couple of definitions of pipeline. One is a kind of management view wherein it's like this data flows from this person to this person to this person, like in a scheduling kind of fashion, or an area of responsibility fashion. And then there's the actual data pipeline itself, which kind of shepherds things from like the concept artist, like everybody hanging out in a room and saying, wouldn't it be cool if, to modeling, and then to texturing and rigging in some cases. If you're reusing things, then rigging is less of a step. If you're coming up with something from scratch, rigging is the process of inserting bones and controls, building a puppet, basically, for the animator's control. So if it's a new rig, that's a whole separate kind of thing. But if it's a reuse case, then it's just model it, texture it, skin it to the existing skeleton, and you're done. Whereas a rigging adds, control design, motion design, possibly transfer of animations from other characters, all kinds of things. And these pipelines are often involving a lot of what you might consider glue scripting. You come at it from like the native scripting language of a 3D content creation tool like Maya or 3D Studio Max or Blender or what have you. And you kind of have to get that data into a format that is recognizable by your game engine. We had a custom engine on WoW, and of course, all the PlayStation games and other things. Maybe these days more people are using Unreal. Like Unreal has become very popular, as has Unity. So a lot of people are using those now, but a lot of these custom engines have very custom formats and expect configurations that require attention to things like how many bytes per vertex, whether or not the data aligns for proper streaming on your console. It can get pretty complicated, but the high level is getting these tools to talk to each other in a clean fashion and making sure your users are able to get their data into the engine correctly and without any unexpected surprises. Sometimes those surprises are called transporter accidents. If you've ever seen a rig gone wrong, it's not pretty. It's not always pretty. Sometimes.
All right, I'm going to recap what you just said. Make sure we got it here. And so essentially a pipeline, there's a production pipeline, which is what we're going to have Barry Hawkins on next time to talk about. And that's about getting the process from I have an idea to a concept to an asset to a rigged asset, an animated asset, and then finally in the game, right? And then the technical pipeline is all of the little steps in between each of those pieces, taking the file from the modeler, getting it to the artist, getting the artist's texture onto the rig, making sure the rig can animate, and then finally converting that file into a way that it can actually appear and play inside the game.
That's essentially it. At some companies like Blizzard, the modeler and texture artist are going to be the same person. At other companies, they have specialists in every single category. Like all you do is model, all you do is surface, whatever it happens to be. Man, game company setups are as individual as the games themselves.
So what is your favorite part of all of that process? It sounds like all of this is sort of under the same umbrella of what you do, but what part of it is the part where you go, I feel so fulfilled, I'm so proud of this?
Well, all right. So part of that is going to be, when you get to see the game in users' hands, and you see that look of delight, and you're in there playing with them, and it's awesome. Like that's absolutely the best part.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter. I don't think it matters what discipline you're in. Like I think just that satisfaction of playing the game with your customers. That's just awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
As far as the work goes, I'm not sure I have a favorite part. Like right now, um, so first off, I'm gonna blatant plug for New World.
Yeah.
#play New World. It's coming out at the end of the month, and it's in open beta right now.
Yep.
It's yet another MMO, but people are excited, and
It feels good, right? Yeah. How many years now has
Yo.
that been in development?
7 years.
Yeah. And
And
how?
when I started
Wow.
on the project, it was basically a tree chopping simulator.
Yeah.
We-
So tell us some stories about like transporter accidents and so on that you've run into in either in New World or WoW or whatever, and how you overcame them.
So a lot of this stuff is just debugging. What happens often, is so animation data in particular is very dependent on a large number of external assets. So, for example, the rig file, the skeleton that we discussed earlier,
Mhm.
is often in its own location, and then you bring that into an application like Maya, and you bind a mesh to it. In most companies, that's going to be what's called a reference. Um, if anything changes in between the moment you applied that and some future date, if the references aren't clean and well maintained, then parts of your model can become bound to incorrect joints. So the head might become remapped to the neck or the chest or something. And when you play animation back on that, the whole thing just looks scrambled.
Mm-hmm.
Depending on the mesh, I mean, particularly with special effects based creatures, you can. Good heaven, I'm falling apart over here. Special effects based creatures, like creatures that have basically particle emitters everywhere, you can almost get away with it, and sometimes it even looks better than what was intended.
Oh yeah.
But in the case of flesh and blood orcs and trolls, it's not pretty at all.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You
and it's
can end up with like
just
wrist
a
kind
matter
of bent the wrong way, or like when the elbow moves, the ear vertex is like flipping around, things like that, right?
right, exactly. One of my favorite things though is the unknown. Like the absolute best part of because everything's always changing.
Mm-hmm.
Like we couldn't do the things we're doing today on the hardware we had back when Alex and I were working together.
Oh, not at all.
It just wasn't remotely possible. I mean, the idea that everybody would have like 8 to 16 to 32 cores sitting on their desktop, I mean, it's absurd. What kind of craziness is that? So now, right, like for New World, I am working on facial animation.
Mm-hmm.
And in particular, last year we took it upon ourselves to devise a way without direct animator involvement to lip sync 8 languages and several thousand lines per language.
Wow.
That's
and
impressive.
Mm-hmm.
thank you. And it looks really cool. The system we came up with, we reuse poses across all our heads. We have a phoneme-driven system. Phonemes are facial shapes that correspond to sounds for speech. There's far fewer of these than there are, like, varieties of words, and it's just easy to compose animation out of these poses.
Mm-hmm.
And we use a machine learning toolkit called the Montreal Forest Aligner, and we allow that to parse all of our audio data into timing and phoneme information, and then we apply that retroactively across all of our characters.
Technology is
It's
so
kinda
great.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
It really is. And machine learning in particular is super exciting right now.
So I understand everything you're describing, right? But can you kind of explain what the old process was and why this innovation is relevant and important?
Well, so I don't not many games try to lip sync everything, especially not in the MMO space.
Yeah.
If you look at, for example, I think the best on the market right now is probably Cyberpunk 2077 for facial animation, and they hired an entire external company that just handled that for them.
Wow.
And with good reason. It's complicated. It's finicky, and they wanted extremely high fidelity. We also want extremely high fidelity, but we felt it was better to roll our own. So here we are.
What is fidelity?
Quality.
Ah.
As opposed to flappy jaw.
Yeah.
Got it.
Like being able to actually see the mouth deform and to have the character give a convincing performance.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason single player games and fighting games to some extent can get away with this is they have absolute control over everything that's on screen.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about bone limitations and upgrading the characters earlier. At one point, the characters in New World had no facial bones at all. Zip, because we couldn't get the performance we wanted with that number of bones,
Mm-hmm.
and we didn't have our LOD system complete, level of detail system, completely sorted out. But over time, we were able to get those facial bones back in there, and it was decided that it was a good thing to attempt. In an MMO, like we said, we don't have control over every person that's going to wander into your scene, especially in towns and places. I'm sure Alex remembers that floating city that had all the performance issues
Dalaran.
if you looked at a particular bauble. Crowd control can be tricky, and it's so that performance balance is always an issue.
Mm-hmm.
But in the old days, the flappy jaw thing was the bulk of games. That was the most anybody did, unless they were extremely cartoony or a fighting game.
Mm-hmm.
Because in a fighting game, you get to spend all of your budget on 2 characters. That's awesome.
And so before, if you wanted lip syncing, you'd have to take that English clip and you had to hand animate I, E, U, E, O on each individual letter to make it look like your mouth is syncing. So you don't look like this as I talk like this and try to basically, Right. So what the machine learning that you've built allows it to kind of go over those audio files in each language and map, which letter is the closest there. And so it does those motions, right, such that it looks like the word or, right, without actually having to go through and hand blend between all of them.
Correct. I estimated, for me, it's about a day per animation. For somebody that does this professionally, they can maybe get 2 in a day doing it by hand like that. It's subtle and it's painstaking. And for the number of lines and the number of languages we have, it's about 30 years worth of work for a single person.
Wow.
And how much does the machine learning bring that down to?
I can process the entire data set in an afternoon.
Wow. So 30 years to 4 hours or 5 hours.
Exactly.
So, Paul, let me ask you something, and it's changing the subject a little bit. But I went to school and I studied character design and a lot of concept art. I'm an illustrator, so
awesome.
Thank you. When you are doing what you do, you have to take a lot from what the concept artists have created. It's all based on that. So, what to you is something that is the mark of a really good concept artist? Things that you see in the art where you're like, oh yes, this is so easy to work with. And then also maybe what are some things where you think, I really wish they included this, or I don't need any of that?
Okay, so, man, what makes good concept art? We could do a whole long production just on that. And God, I've been so lucky to work with so many good concept artists. Blizzard, of course, is famous for the quality of artists that it brings in and maintains, and still friends with many of those folks. Good concept art is above all clear. Like if the silhouette is the thing that we're if the silhouette of the character is the most important thing, then by golly, it should be very much called out, even framed in silhouette to make sure that everybody understands what's going on there and why it's important. Beyond that, like actually concept art doesn't directly impact the way technical artists deal with things, other than as a sanity check. Like, did we hit that target? Um, because it's the modelers and the texture artists and the special effects artists that are really in charge of creating those assets. The tech art team generally is more in the facilitating kind of role. If you've got an artist, they need brushes and they need canvases and things, and we provide those. The but clarity, good quality in terms of like material callouts and things. Like some games have a very cartoony style, so maybe you don't need as many textural callouts. But if you're on one of those projects that's looking for hyper realism, material callouts, specularity callouts, all become very, very important. They don't necessarily have to be fully rendered. Most people look at fully rendered marketing art and they believe that's concept art, and maybe marketing people lie a bit about that. Look at this concept art. No, you paid $5,000 for that illustration, and I know the guy that did it. It's airbrush.
Yeah.
You just made that for the book.
Full shots.
Yeah.
Yeah, so as you said, there's all different layers of quality on there, right? And the most important thing is conveying what is the character, what is the silhouette, what is the essential elements of that character, and what do the tech artists and modelers need to represent within it. And that often will then inform the game designers, right? About, hey, what abilities do we want to put in this kit? And then I'm like, hey, I want a spear, but I want it to light up in fire. Hey, Paul, how do I make a spear light up on fire? And he goes, okay, well, here we go. Right? And you would work with me on that, right? And then we'd figure out how to toggle the fire on or off. Or if you're in the middle of an ability, like a specific ability, you have a certain talent equipped, it now is blue fire instead of green fire, right?
Right. And sometimes that can come down to tooling. Like maybe we'll create a tool for you so that it's easy to say, turn on and off the fire, and here's the color and the volume and et cetera.
Yep.
A lot of our work winds up behind the scenes, though. A lot of it's just those little transport scripts, getting things out of Maya or Max. I recall, and even today to some extent, because I'm working with voiceover, working with the audio team, and a lot of that stuff is like all about marrying data together in interesting ways on the back end. Because after Alex has determined like what the character is going to do and how they're going to do it, and the animators have done their thing and made sure that all the animations support the vision for that character, there's a whole nother group of people working on audio to make sure that the swords go swish swish, clang clang, and all the rest of that. And they're sadly the very last people in the chain. So you're there and you've got a deadline, and the poor audio guy is like, hey, do we have those assets yet?
Yeah, and they're just coming in late because the animators are running late, and you're trying to get this out for alpha or beta testing, and it's next week, and you get it out there, and it's models in, and all the developers been testing with what? The sound turned off, because otherwise you'd have background noise. So no one's realized that all of these assets don't have these event flags saying, hey, play a footstep on each pad. That's where Superhero Forest comes in, right? And you actually go in, you look at the rig, you figure, here's the events, and then toggle them on, and then work with those guys really quickly behind the scenes to get them, get it in game so they can test their own work, right?
Mm-hmm.
We actually, the last thing I did at Blizz before I left was to enable the audio designers to insert those events themselves, and to break the dependency chain. Because what happened was we had this big binary bundle that was the character file, and all the things for the character were in that single file. So if the animator's working on it, you as the audio designer can't touch it. And if the animator's working on it, the modeler can't touch it. Like it was all very, one person at a time, line up to do your little bit. And so we chipped off the data layer and allowed them to generate events external to that data file, to that data bundle, so that even if the modeler is changing things, even if the animator is changing things, they could iterate or turn the crank on audio and be in parallel with the rest of the team, instead of being at the end of a terrible, lengthy process.
Mm-hmm.
And I
So how
think
do
they
you
were
make those tools? You're talking about making tools for people, but like what software are you using to do that? What is the technical and specific way that you are creating things for these people?
So these days, it's all about Python, and thank God, Python has just opened so many doors, including the machine learning stuff. I don't think I would have ever thought to go down that path had Python not also become the default language for machine learning work. And it's everywhere. Python is absolutely, it's in every 3D application. It's in all the game engines. And it's just brilliant because the syntax is simple. It's very easy to pick up, and the philosophy of the language is not tied up in some particular academic theory or anything. So it's kind of like if you want to do object-oriented programming, you can do that. You can also do functional programming. You can also just scripts. You can compile things. You have all these options that aren't available to you in other languages, or only one aspect of that process is available to you in another language. So being embedded in the tools in Maya and Max and Blender, etc., it's just a very complete set of tools for developing other tools. So we can build standalone GUI applications for users. Something that's all pretty and shiny, like a standard app. Or we can write little tiny scriptlets that run in the background when they're using some bigger tool.
I see. So how did you learn Python? Did you take classes or did you just figure it out yourself?
An attribute of technical artists is if you don't stay on top of technology, you are doomed to die. So as soon as Python became available, I made it a priority to learn and begin migrating tools into that language, because it was clearly the future, even if it wasn't the present at the time.
But by then you were already...
It takes foresight to recognize that, right? And then understand that you have to do it. So that's true. So a lot of people, right, might be even coming to watch these podcasts partway into their career or at the end of their college studies and hearing like, oh no, a new language. But where in your career were you when you decided you had to switch to learning Python? Was it 5 years in, 10 years in?
Okay, so I'm a dinosaur.
Yeah.
Like I made games on the original PlayStation.
Yeah.
Python was not a glimmer in anybody's eye at that stage. I don't even think Lua was a thing back then. Like,
not at all.
If you wanted to script on our PlayStation games, basically the engineers gave you like a subset of C commands that you could use.
Wow.
and there was an interpreter in the engine. We had 2 megs of RAM. I don't think a texture map fits into 2 megs of RAM anymore.
No.
Not a chance.
But so by the time Python hit the scene, I was at Blizzard, and we were. So when I arrived at Blizzard, the tools were all ancient. Like they were running on a build of Maya and a build of Max so old that Autodesk itself said, "No, we're not supporting that. Are you crazy?" So we had to kind of pull that forward into the then present era. And as part of that, Python was being integrated slowly by third parties. There was something called PyMel, which came out of, I want to say, Blur Studios. And many visual effects studios were already using Python. And 3D Studio, maybe it was Max. Maybe Blur was the Max thing. PyMel was somebody else. But people were slowly just forcing it to happen. Because these applications have embedded scripting languages. Like, for example, Maya has a thing called Mel, which is a Maya embedded language. And it's based on C shell scripting from the old SGI Unix days, for those of you who are that old. And, Mel is amazing. Like, Mel is part of what made Maya what it is. Like, the ability for users to extend it, to create their own tools and workflows. This had never been done in a 3D program before. But C shell scripting, we're talking about something that's retirement age, to be generous.
All right. Well, all right. But so it was what, 10, 15 years into your career, you had to learn the new language. You did, and you can use it for over a decade now easily, right?
Yeah. It's about 2009, I'd say, and yeah, here we are, and it's 2021. So
So it just goes to show that learning these new skills and picking them up is something you can not only do, not only at the end of college and on the workplace, but something you must do to stay current and to continue to adapt and grow.
well, so I've got a funny story about that
Let's
actually.
hear
When
it.
I first got to Blizz, I was I was still taking classes. Like I really feel it's important for a technical artist to keep up their art side, even if they're not actually directly using it in their day to day. So I paint, I draw, and like when I moved down to Southern California from San Francisco, I had been taking classes at the Animators Union in Hollywood, and I even made the commute in between there.
That's a 3 hour
Um,
drive in traffic, sir. That is commitment.
Yeah.
if craziness, right? And then as I got here, I wanted to find where all the good classes were, and being like near Hollywood, there's so much good instruction and so many good workshops and things you can take. So I signed up for this thing in Pasadena, and there were 4 people from my team there the first day of class, and these guys are like senior artists on WoW, and they're art directors and things, and it's like, okay, this is the right place, this
Yeah.
is the right thing, because the fact is everybody who's at the top of their game is studying and working hard.
Mm-hmm.
It's lies your guidance counselor tells you, and it's like, oh yeah, they'll totally take entry level and stuff. You're not competing with the likes of Drew Struzan. You're totally competing with Drew Struzan and everybody else. I mean, that's fact is everybody's competing all the time.
Mm.
That's not to be discouraging, because there's always somebody better than you, and there's and the cool thing is everybody's willing to teach. I've very rarely ran into the sort of person who's going to keep all their secrets to themselves.
Yep.
I mean, I have seen it. They don't tend to last very long.
Also, they tend to actually not be all that good, because the real reason they're keeping secrets is they don't actually know how to convey and teach. And rather than admitting they don't know how to teach what they've learned, or that it's intuitive to them rather than something they can systemize, they just pretend like it's some erudite secret, when in truth it just means they don't really understand it. And so they're usually
Right.
would have been a poor teacher anyways.
Exactly. In fact, I find at this point in my career that mentoring is a fantastic activity. It's it really is true. You learn more from your students than you actually manage to get through their heads, and that's okay. Like,
Yeah.
they're happy to get what they're getting, and if you're doing it right, then you're getting a ton of information from them. They're going to show you things that you didn't even know were possible, and vice versa.
What's something that you've learned from somebody that you've mentored?
Well, so let's see. It's the best lesson I've gotten.
Or when you
So
can
so
say
I
publicly.
recently I had one of my students actually get hired onto our DevOps team on New World. So I was very pleased about that.
Congratulations.
Thank you, and congratulations to him, because he's fantastic. So he came from another part of Amazon, not related to game development at all. And I guess the thing that I'm learning that I learned most from him was just how different people's circumstances are when they're trying to break in, and how much disinformation there is out there. Like, there's just like a lot of silly notions floating around about what you need to be and what you need to work on and how you need to study. And there's a lot of misunderstanding of just how vast the development process is.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, we've talked about international localization. We've talked about production. We've talked about government regulations and how they can impact your design. We haven't covered at all what DevOps does. And just as a brief aside, DevOps is the art and science of making scalable architecture for software. And if that sounds dry, it is kind of, but at the same time, it's super exciting, because the idea that you can write software that scales to millions of users painlessly, a lesson that had not been learned when WoW launched.
Yeah, I remember when
Uh,
they did the Gates of Encourage event, right? And 1,000 people showed up to watch the gong get rung, and the servers that time hadn't been structured in a way that they could self-shard, right, and spread people out across load. So you had all of the population of every WoW server collapse into this one little square, which had to run on a single processor, and it meant that everyone got 1 frame a minute or so, right? It was literally that slow trying to handle all the people who just wanted to watch this cool little event play out.
and
And
it was the same problem with the Diablo launch.
yeah,
Everybody wants to hit that same login server at the same time. It's
yeah, and
so being at Amazon's a good place to be for that kind of thing, because they figured out early on that they couldn't just have everybody in the world hitting one server, and AWS is absurd when it comes to how good it is at dealing with these complexities of scale.
yeah,
So DevOps people are the people in charge of that stuff, and so as I worked with my student, um, you know, we talked about the things he enjoyed doing, and really this is a huge thing, right? Like, you shouldn't take a job because you think it's prestigious or lucrative or whatever. Like, you should take a job because you're going to get skills out of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, you're going to get skills, or it's something you're really passionate about. But you shouldn't just go in and sign up because you think, oh, this will be cool for a little while or whatever. You're never going to survive in that environment where people are literally training all the time. But also, it's good to acknowledge that you can be adjacent to things you love. Like, I love illustration, I love painting. Um, I'm nowhere near as good as probably you, Ariana, or most of the folks that work at Blizz. They're just amazing painters.
yeah.
But I still love to paint.
Glenn Rain's stuff still always rings in my mind. Like that guy was
Right?
amazing, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. And so many of the guest artists we had come through there: Craig Mullins, Charles Vess. It's crazy. Brahm.
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
It's absolutely maddening how many like amazing artists pass through that space. And but anyway, like knowing that you can be productive and do things that you excel at and still be like kind of in that mix is important. And so a lot of the discussions with my student were about what his motivations were, what he was good at, what it would take to get to some of these other things, these ideas that he had coming in. Like, he's like, oh, maybe I want to be a gameplay programmer, or maybe I want to write
sure.
shaders. Da, da, da. It's like, well, hang on, hold on, back up. What are you good at? you know, and then
Mm-hmm.
how can that be applied in the context of games? And how can we get you in front of the right people so that you can succeed? And that led us to DevOps and all the crazy things about scaling software and dealing with cloud-based technologies. And he's happy. So
That's the
That's
most
great.
important thing, right?
absolutely.
Did you have any mentors when you were first starting out, or were you sort
All
of on your
kinds.
own?
Oh, so many. So at Sony back in the day, um, I had a friend named Lynn who guided me through the horrors of Microsoft Office, because I needed organizational tools, and it's so it's a different time, right? Like, we're talking about 1995, and 2 megs of RAM and all that, but also, like, hardly anybody knows 3D applications. So the main reason I got my job at Sony in '95 was because I knew 3D. I could make polygons move around, and that was enough. I didn't have to be amazing at making polygons moving around. I just had to make them move, and um, and so I didn't have any uh, office skills. I knew nothing about industry culture. I showed up in a three-piece suit and was greeted at the door by a fellow with hair down in the middle of his back in Baja shorts. I said, I feel like I overdressed, and he says, "Yeah, you're never wrong, man." and so we went. See, I mean, it was weird. Like, back then, I had to pass a drug test to get into a game company.
yeah,
And here we are in 2021, and you can go down the street and get weed from a store legally. It's the world has changed,
Yeah,
clearly.
a different time for
Um,
sure.
but so I desperately needed to learn about things like how to deal with spreadsheets, how to deal with and this is actually really the start of my notion of tech art. I didn't even have a word for it, but we had engineers coming to us and asking for things because so PlayStation hasn't hit yet. We haven't shipped the first PlayStation. So Nintendo SNES is like, the king of the hill, and everybody else is like, I don't know what to do, man. And Mario 64 hasn't come out, so we haven't figured out cameras.
Mm-hmm.
I credit that game with helping people learn how to deal with cameras.
Yeah.
But so we had 3D software. We had a bunch of really smart engineers. Eh, we had the developers from not Autodesk, Alias Wavefront show up in lab coats. We had like a half dozen senior scientists from Alias Wavefront show up and help us do things like figure out how to do quaternion interpolation, which is a special kind of math that makes rotation more clean. So this is as opposed to Euler rotations. Euler rotations interpolate 3 axes and have a tendency to lock up or cause those transporter accidents we discussed earlier, whereas quaternions pass that error term off into a 4th dimension and allow for clean rotations. At the time, it was a controversial choice because we had 33 megahertz that's megahertz, not gigahertz.
Uh-huh.
And it was a very slow processor, and so every bit counted, including like whether you used 3 vectors or 4 to calculate your rotations.
Mm-hmm.
So and the language of the software was such that the engineers had specific expectations, maybe abstract expectations, that the software implemented in things that were very specific to itself, right? So if you were in a 3D app, you might have control points and surface points and various other types of specifically labeled things, and your engineers are asking for vertices and edges, and your software doesn't reflect that,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you're like, I don't know. And so I made it a point to figure out how to talk to engineers about what we were doing.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually this became technical art. But at the time, it was just, I was lead animator on a project and I had a need to communicate. And, we had deadlines. So, but yeah, so my mentors helped me with everything from learning to be nice. In your 20s, you're not always nice. I was not nice.
I was an asshole at 22 as well. It took a couple years to shave that off.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah. Get in the rock tumbler.
Yeah.
Um,
Ari, I think, was born nice, right?
Yeah,
she hit 20. She's still nice, so.
I'm nice. I'm 23, but
Yeah.
I know people who aren't nice, so.
Surprise.
Yeah, but so all kinds of mentors in all kinds of subjects, and an endless thirst for knowledge. I would go to every conference that I was able to. I've been to SIGGRAPH more often than not. GDC for roundtables. Right now in parallel with our recording session here is a Lightbox Expo happening online right now, and that's, I'm sure you're aware, Ariana, there's just millions of illustrators hanging out there right now, like showing off and being amazing. And
such a cool convention.
I love all this stuff. Oh, it really is.
Yeah.
So I love all this, and I try as often as possible to take advantage of any learning opportunity that comes my way. At Amazon, because Amazon, like, I was able to take advantage of machine learning courses, which led me to this time-saving approach to lip sync. And
yeah,
it's I'm sure in 2 years I'll be doing something equally unknown and strange and challenging, and I'm going to love it.
All right. So if you were to give some advice to someone who's listened to this podcast, oh man, I love the idea of bringing things to life, even though I'm not the animation guy, I'm not the model guy, right, or girl. And they say, all right, cool. What 2 things should I learn? So Python clearly was one. What would you pick as number 2? For them to go and learn and get started.
So I would actually say that the only skill required is one, to be able to recognize that you don't know something, and
Oh, I
two,
love that.
be able to learn that thing and dive as deep as you need to get the job done.
So the
And
most
that doesn't matter what software you're on.
Yeah. And so what matters isn't a technical skill, it's an attitude and humility towards life to be able to say, I don't know, and learn.
Precisely.
I
Paul,
really. Yeah, go ahead, Ari.
Thank you so much for your advice and your time. It was such a pleasure to have you.
Yeah,
Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure to be here.
Yeah, Paul, it was great seeing you. And thank you for those last words. I really love that. That attitude you've expressed. And, it's been something you've always expressed throughout every time I've interacted with you in your career. You've always been, how do I help? How do we make this possible? How do we turn the impossible into the possible, right? And that is really what tech art does at the end of the day. They say, hey, we have 1 million lines. There's no way we could lip sync this to maybe we can, right? They'll say, hey,
exactly.
We stick wings on an orc. Let's do it, right?
Before you go, do you have any kind of social media or an art station or anything like that where people can check out your work?
Oh, I wish I'd thought to prepare links. I do, but it's kind of like my corny watercolors and ink drawings and things. I don't know how relevant that is. I'll say check out #PlayNewWorld and tell me what you think of my latest stuff.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Paul.
Yeah, thank you. Well,
thank you.
You guys have a great rest of your day. It was so nice talking with you.
It was wonderful. Thank you very much.